I think we're ready to begin now. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ed Arnold, and I'm Vice President of Products here at LeveragePoint. I'd like to welcome all of you to another one of our monthly webinars of thought leadership in the area of value-based strategy. Sponsored by LeveragePoint. LeveragePoint provides the only software solution for value-based pricing. We offer a cloud-based collaboration platform that supports product innovation as well as sales enablement that changes the way companies create, communicate, and capture value. Find out more about us from our website, LeveragePoint.com. Now, during this webinar, if you have any specific questions or comments, please feel free to enter them in the right-hand panel in the questions section. And then later in the webinar, we'll respond to as many of them as we can. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. It's my great pleasure to introduce Joanne Smith. Joanne is author of the book, The Pricing and Profit Playbook, which we highly recommend and which she'll share some highlights from in today's webinar. Joanne is an experienced B2B executive with over 20 years of experience. Most recently, she was Corporate Director of Marketing and Pricing at DuPont. And currently, she runs her own consultancy where she assists B2B companies on their transformation to better long-term profitability by improving their pricing performance. And let me just add that what I really like about Joanne's book is that it's written from a hands-on, practical perspective, and I know many in our audience will appreciate that. So before we get started with Joanne, we'd like to ask a polling question. And we want to get a sense of your experiences with value-based strategy. So if you could choose one of the following responses to the question, how far has your company gone in adopting a value-based pricing strategy as opposed to cost-plus or competitive pricing? Either actively engaged, starting to shift towards, researching how to start, researching if value-based pricing will work for us, and not sure. So if you can choose one of those, we can take a look at the background of the audience before we get started with Joanne.
Hey, Ed, this is Joanne, and while they're voting, I just want to say great question, because as I go through the talk, I'm really going to talk about pricing maturity and how to go from a low end up to a higher end. So it's a great starting question.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. And I'll look at my colleague to see if the responses are in. Okay, so we're going to show some results right now. And let me just see the results right here. And it looks like, well, a large majority are starting to think about the shift to a value-based pricing approach, with 28% already getting started. So it looks like, Joanne, you've got a lot of experienced folks here about value-based pricing.
Yeah, no, that's great.
All right, so I think we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, very good. And let's see, have you given me chart control? Here we go. All right. I just wanted to start with just a real brief background here on DuPont. And the chart you're looking at here shows 15 years of quarter-over-quarter price changes for DuPont. And you can see about midway where I said we started our pricing efforts. So before that, most quarters, we were actually losing some price overall in the company. And once we started our pricing effort, quarter over quarter for 5.5 straight years, we just added and added. We had a small 2-quarter dip during the 2009 recession and quickly turned that right back around with further increases. The point I'd like to make is in those early years, the kinds of skills that we learned and used to increase price continue to be good, but we had to continually add new skills, new systems in order to get that increase quarter upon quarter going forward. So let's see, I think I'm losing control here of the, there we go. Ed mentioned that I had a book that came out this fall, which really is very practical guidance around how to transform a company. And I tried to put in here all of my best learnings from my 6 years of starting up and running the DuPont pricing. And I'll just select a couple nuggets that I'll share in the next few charts today. I will say, you notice it's a playbook, and I do make a play on words with football analogies, so you're going to see a little bit of that through this talk as well. My experience is that a lot of B2B companies are in the early stages of pricing maturity, and I think the survey suggested certainly there are a lot of that on the line, and that's where DuPont was when we started. So I kind of liken that to a pee-wee football team where either everybody thinks they have the ball or nobody knows who has the ball. And we're really trying to move towards more the kind of professional football team across our multi-year journey. So let's just see here. I'm having a little control problem here. There we go. One of the things that certainly many of you that have been at this as a while know, there's really three foundational kinds of elements of pricing. One is transactional, one is strategic pricing, and of course value pricing that we're focused on today. But I do want to make the point that both strategic and transactional have real implications to value pricing. And if you don't do those well, they will hurt your value pricing efforts. So I want to just briefly talk to both of those and then dive into the directly to value pricing. Okay. So this is really talking about strategic pricing here. And strategic pricing, to me, as I define it, is really about industry-level pricing and how you can broadly affect industry pricing. Now, it really plays off the fact that whenever you make pricing moves, it has implications to your competitors who are likely to make moves as well. And when they make certain moves, it's going to affect your actions. So there have been many studies, and I've certainly seen this played out in spades, where the higher the industry profitability is, really the better your profitability is likely to be as well. So it's in your best interest to foster positive industry profitability. And those with behaviors like value-based pricing, like price increases, like being fair and trustworthy in your pricing efforts, versus things like that would be disruptive to a market system, would be undercutting competition, dropping price, and things like that. Those type of behaviors over the long haul tend to hurt both the industry profitability, your own profitability as well. So if we take that to the next chart, and I am having trouble advancing these charts. So here it comes up. We have, typically I think you think of strategic pricing, and a lot of commodity type companies tend to embrace this in a heavier way where they really understand the pricing dynamics, the macroeconomics, and they play that to their favor, really working when it's positive and taking advantage and managing it on the downside. But I would tell you in the last almost 10 years, with the volatility in the economy, with the changes in oil prices and the varying recessions, specialty companies need to excel at strategic pricing as well. And additionally, as I've already mentioned, value differentiation, value pricing comes into play here as well. And I'll explain that in the next chart or two. So in this chart here, if you're not actively thinking about strategic pricing and managing it, you're still taking actions in the marketplace, and you are having some unintended consequences. They may be working for you or against you, but clearly they're out there. So, as an example, behaviors such as if a lot of the industry has had raw material increases and they're starting to pass that on to their customers, and you have those same increases but choose not to increase price, you are actually kind of hurting the ability of competition to increase price, you're hurting the industry profitability, and you're creating a little kind of distrust and confusion in the marketplace. Likewise, if you announce higher prices, but you don't actually follow through with it, you're again creating some form of confusion and mistrust in the marketplace. And a third point here, which is actually, I think, covered by this box, unfortunately, is when you undervalue your products and you put them out into the marketplace without good value pricing, you can also disrupt the market. And let me give you an example here. In our agricultural business, we had come out with a brand new product that was far, far superior than what had been on the market. And the business decided to price it about 20% price premium to the existing competitor base. But the actual economic valuation was almost twice or almost double that price. So as you might imagine, as we got established, we started to get share, and by the second season, our competitors actually dropped price almost in half. And they dropped that price, so the market actually forced the value differentiation as it got experience with it, but it forced it at a much lower pricing for all parties involved. We could have had a much higher price, our competitors could have kept their price, and we would have advanced. As it was, we hurt the actual industry pricing and leaked price. So that's kind of an example. So when you think about unintended consequences, anything that you're doing that creates confusion or mistrust in the eyes of either your customers or your competitors works against you. It really gives you more competitive pressures. Your customers, their buyers, are going to be more aggressive in negotiations. They're not going to believe everything that you say near as easily. And, of course, your competitors will get more aggressive because they're afraid that you're going to take action to, quote, buy their share. So now let me just turn to transactional pricing a minute. And if you take a look at this graph, which let's just assume it's one product and the varying customers that buy it at different volumes, and the y-axis is price. When I see a wide scatter like that, and I can't easily see kind of the value trend in that chart, first thing I think of is this is a sign of poor value pricing. It's either lack of policies that are value-based, or you're just not following your policies. And when this happens, once again, you've got confused customers, more aggressive competition because they're confused and distrustful. Now, I'll give you an example. I know many businesses that I work with say, oh, yeah, but nobody knows our prices except for the specific customer. We don't share that in any way. But time and time again, I have seen those prices and that price knowledge leak between customers. And just to give you an example, how does that happen? You know, in today's industry, it's not unusual for a customer to buy another customer and get a chance to see that pricing, or to hire somebody from one of their own competitive base and see that knowledge. I've also seen it where Europe prices one way to U.S., and somebody gets wind that the pricing is wildly different. You also get competitors. They're coming in and negotiating and trying to get your business. They often start to learn some of your pricing, and they sometimes will share that with other customers as they continue negotiating. So I have absolutely seen customers, and when you get a large customer that has paid high price, one of your high-value customers, and they find out that you're giving much lower pricing to somebody that is of less value to you, it really destroys the relationship. So those are how strategic and transactional play into value pricing effects. So this chart is really about pricing behavior, and just to quickly go through it, really the best behavior is being fair and trustworthy in the marketplace, in the eyes of the marketplace. And that really means very clear communications about your pricing action and the rationale so people understand why you make the moves that you make. It's walking the talk, doing what you're saying you're going to do, being predictable. And certainly that middle box is being a value pricer, not just in how you set your initial price of a product, but when you're in a negotiation and you're being forced and pushed to lower price, you need to also take away something of value. You need to be very clear in your negotiations that if somebody wants lower price, they get less for it. That's what a value pricer is. They make trade-offs on value and price. And then the back half certainly is how you react to competitive threats, which is you do need to quickly act upon those, but then you need to very quickly, after doing so, go right back to purposeful behavior. So those are the kind of guidelines that all support being able to execute on value-based pricing effectively. Now I'm going to turn straight to value pricing. And I'm going to assume that most of you are familiar with how to build up and quantify value using an economic valuation that's depicted in this picture. But I want to just say when you do this and you're able to articulate that and quantify that value, it establishes trust in the marketplace. And with trust comes better odds that you're going to be able to get the appropriate price that you deserve. So in my book, I talk really about kind of 4 levels of maturity in value pricing. And clearly, to me, value pricing is by far the hardest of the 3 levels of pricing to really establish and get sustained, but well worth it. And so the levels that I speak to are kind of emerging, where maybe you've just done it with a couple different products, to more established, where you've done it for certainly several different products, and you're beginning to introduce value quantification tools, value calculators, or even something like LeveragePoint, which, by the way, could take you much further in your maturity. Advanced is where not only do you have this kind of EVE knowledge and whatnot by your marketplace, but you begin to bring in things like customer needs-based segmentation, and you begin to modify both your offering and the value, the price for those given segmentations. And then very advanced is really when your whole commercial team, your company begins to have a holistic value seller culture and supporting with all the practices and systems. So I'm going to kind of start. I know several of you are probably in at least level 2 of this, and some of you are still in the emergent phase. But let's just start, how would I start with nothing, out there? I might begin with, on your new product innovations, beginning to do the quantification or the economic value evaluation, the EVE. And here I typically would use a workshop approach, and I might bring in a business team and facilitate them through understanding and hypothesizing the value that you have. And part of that, then they might have to go out and do some fact-finding to validate and refine from a workshop perspective. In the second sort of thing, I would tend to take all your products and lump them into 3 buckets. Not differentiated all the way to highly differentiated, the third bucket there. And see, do you really have price bands where your more differentiated products are at the high end of pricing versus non-differentiated? And if they're not, you can take some very easy starter steps by maybe taking a 5 or 10% price increase in your differentiated products somewhat broadly, or targeting those customers that are on the low end of pricing for your more differentiated segments and beginning to shift those up. So they may just kind of be, entry-level sort of things to do. But as you get more advanced and you want to do your portfolio of products, and let's face it, in B2B, often not only do you have hundreds, if not thousands of products, you often have them going into multiple different markets, and different markets value some of the features differently and therefore have different value pricing. So it can be somewhat overwhelming, and you really need to kind of triage and start with the sweet spot to bring in that value, not try and tackle every variation of that at once. So let me start kind of to the right-hand side, the place where you might start putting more of your energy here. And by the way, it's this kind of transition where you really want to bring in something like a LeveragePoint system to help you really get the sustainability and the leverage across such a large product range. But at that kind of external validation, I tend to suggest starting with either new products that you believe are going to grow to be large, or highly differentiated, high-volume products that exist today. And in those, I would do the kind of cross-functional team workshop where I would use an expert to really facilitate that through really good EVEs. And then I would go out and have parts of that team or the expert do some external validation and refinement of those key drivers and how they're quantified. Slightly below that, next tier of effort might be those products that are slightly unique, whether they're new or mature. And if they have reasonable size to them, once again, you may begin to get some cross-functional team input. If they're slightly unique, you might not really need to do so much external validation, and you might be close enough with your internal validation to work with. If I move further down to really low volume, unique products, sometimes these just aren't enough volume to really warrant a lot of energy. And if that's the case, doing a kind of quick and dirty with one or two experts on the likely value and some estimating is really kind of good. And then if you have no differentiation, you've got products that are commodity-like, then you're not going to run through any kind of major EVE. But I do want to say that even commodity price products can often have a premium if you have a customer experience around it that really warrants that. And I say that because we certainly saw it in DuPont. In fact, one of our businesses that was highly commoditized, the exact product for product, exact, of another competitor, we actually had 20% price premium than other competitors. And we had it because of the totality of our customer experience and the services and the brand that we brought forward. So when I talk about don't bother with EVE, I am absolutely not saying don't bother with price premium if you have kind of the customer experience around those commodities that allow you to differentiate. All right. Now, if we move on, eventually, as I talked about getting more advanced, you start to take maybe customer needs-based segmentation into effect as well. You might be in the same, let's say, electronic market that you're playing with the same product, but certainly in more mature markets, you tend to have evolving different customers. Some of them might be price buyers, and they really don't want anything but the lowest price you can offer. Now, they'll take any service you offer, but they won't pay for it. All the way up to folks that really need new technology or they need technical support. So understanding the varying segments and ultimately coming up with different offerings for those main segments at different price points is how you're going to get the most profitability. So a good value pricer is really looking usually to get the biggest volume that they can at the highest price that they deserve. And it's really this kind of segmentation and tweaking up your value to price that allows you to do that. So if I just talk as an example here, I recently left DuPont, and as I started my own consulting company, I went to LegalZoom to incorporate my company, and sure enough, they got great value pricing right there on the web. The lowest value at the lowest price, and the higher you're willing to pay, all the greater services that you can get with that. In my case, I was going right for the economy, the $99. I didn't need anything. Hey, and by the time I was done, they had uplifted me to the highest package because there were services, by the way, services that they didn't even offer. They partnered with a marketing firm that would help me with web design and initial marketing of the company. So they gave me value, and it really upsold me to that level of buy. Now, in the B2B world, we have usually different things that we work with when we put out. And so I just kind of show you maybe 3 levels of the types of kinds of segmentation thoughts that we might have considered in a lot of businesses. And at the low end, maybe it's only standard products. And at the higher end, it's standard and custom products. And by the way, maybe application development as well. At the low end, there's no service versus large service. The low end, it might be online ordering only, maybe inside sellers only, high-end field sellers and customer service reps. So it might vary a bit, and quite often we do a lot of work with our services as we think about segmentation and customer needs-based segmentation in a B2B environment. So if I think about how do you get started here and the kind of complexity that one might see as well, if I go fully to the right where we have the most advanced, the most external validation, and really if you have a mature business, very complex in products and very complex in customers, you probably, and you want to get a handle around all of that, you're probably going to go somewhere out here. Often we use conjoint-based surveys to really understand the key drivers out there and understand the kind of buying groups or clusters of buyers with similar needs. In this sort of process, you have to internally hypothesize what these value drivers are or what these segments might be in order to design your conjoint. And a conjoint is actually a trade-off. So you're essentially saying, would you rather have price or would you like technical service? Would you rather have technical service or an inside seller or a field seller? So you're really checking a number of features, quite often service-oriented or one-time delivery and those sort of kinds of features that you can then use to come up with different offerings. If I take that slightly to the left, where you have mature but better, well-understood segments, or perhaps you're dealing with a smaller segment of your total business, once again, you've got to do this internal hypothesis of what those segments and drivers might be. But then you can usually do interviews and or some minor validations with maybe 10 or 12 customers, picking different types of customers out there. And then as we move that further to the right, if you have what you believe is predominantly price buyers, and you don't actually have a lot of service choices, knobs that you can turn on and off, then I think you really do that more with internal hypothesis, very little external hypothesis. Now, I will say across DuPont, rarely did I see businesses that were this heavy in price buyers that would take you all the way to this level. But there was an example in our automotive industry where we actually sold the paint or the coatings for the outside of cars, and all of the competitors really had very similar offerings, and they truly in automotive were price buyers, 90%. So segmentation in that case didn't make a lot of practical sense. And if we take it all the way to the quick and dirty to the right, now we're talking, if you have brand new products or your product type is new in an industry, you don't generally need to go to segmentation because the industry and the users are not familiar enough, and they probably need all of your services, and you're not going to see quite the same dynamic of once they get used to it, and then you start to see that price buyer emerge and things like that. So those tend to be things that can wait for you to look at a little bit later in your journey. All right, so we've talked about this coming up with your value pricing, but in some ways, as hard as that may be, it's actually the easy part of the journey. And I think actually executing in any kind of sustainable way is where more of the effort kind of comes in. And so I am a large proponent of really thinking if you're driving this, you need to also be thinking about and driving strategy, culture, competency, reward and recognition, process and systems, not just across pricing resources, but across sales and back up into marketing, business, and even some changes at an enterprise level to really be successful over the long haul. And this, of course, is when we start to get more in the advanced stages. But this chart really kind of speaks to the fact that if you really want, in football analogy, that home team advantage, it really requires the passion and the urgency from the full organization. Just like in a football, you know, it's not just about the coach's ability, and I'll liken coaches to pricing resources. You got your salespeople that need to execute, which would be like the players in football. You got cheerleaders and bands and fans and owners all needing to kind of bring that energy. And for the business world, that means your business folks, your marketing folks, your customer service, technology folks, they all have a piece to play in really getting towards value selling at its advanced stage. So you need to build that kind of passion and urgency across them. And I just list kind of a couple examples of how you might do that on this chart here. Certainly, you know, in black, you've got to bring the business case forward with the real numbers so that they can see that there is tremendous value in going after price. But on the culture side, you can use things like pricing maturity metrics to help build that case. Certainly, sales incentives can have a big implication, driving objectives from a corporate level all the way down through marketing and sales, and certainly investing in the right process systems, resources. On the competency side, doing pricing projects themselves certainly help, or forming networks of people that can share their pricing helps. I did in DuPont a lot of training. I would do a 2-day training course for product line managers, marketing managers and directors, business managers and directors. You know, sales, we did more of the 1-day kinds of training, but they need a certain skill to do their piece and to be supportive of the whole. Now, this is just the left side, and I just say to bring it all home, eventually you need really good data, and you need to bring in systems and processes if you're going to advance to any kind of high-level maturity. And for me, you know, there's two very additive and yet different types of systems that I think are very important. The first one, which is around kind of holistic systems that really enable your basic price process, price setting, administration, negotiation kind of performance. More of that kind of management system you might think of like a Vindavo in that kind of vein. But you need to also have the value selling system. And for me, something like a LeveragePoint that actually combines the capability to do value quantification, store case studies, but turn that into material that salespeople can use to demonstrate the value to the customer and to maybe tweak kind of your value price offering to meet that customer or that segmentation is really what you need to become a real value player. So there I have shared quite a high-level overview and a lot of information. So, Ed, this would be a great time to turn it back to you for questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joanne, for an excellent presentation. There's really a lot of excellent content there, and I especially love that quote about getting a 20% premium on a commodity based on the quality of the customer experience. Really great to hear it from your perspective, because folks don't really understand that, at least some of the teams that I've had an opportunity to work with. really don't underestimate the value of the customer experience. So I thank you for sharing that. We do have some questions that are coming in, and I just want to remind everybody that if you want to get your question on the queue right now, this is a great time to add it into the questions panel on the right-hand side. So before we get to the questions, I just want to expand a little bit on what you said, Joanne, about EVE analysis, and I want to show it from the context of how our customers use LeveragePoint to do exactly that. So first off is that LeveragePoint is a cloud-based application, and that means that everyone in the enterprise can efficiently collaborate on a number of value-based activities. And when I say efficient, what I mean is that all the data is kept in one place, and it's totally secure and organized for people to search and reuse the best data and thinking. Now, this helps the product marketing and pricing teams build out value models so they can make better strategic decisions. So whether it's product development, offer definition, market segmentation, competitive positioning, or even pricing, you have a common structured platform where teams can collaborate efficiently. And as you mentioned, once those strategic decisions have been made, you also have an excellent content repository for customer-facing teams to access this value-based marketing and sales materials, and that gives them a lot more confidence in communicating your differentiation. And then finally, you can get both of those sides linked together, which enables continuous improvement and also as a way to share the best field intelligence. So that's a tremendous advantage that allows even very large organizations to develop and execute nimbly in much the way that you talked about, Joanne. All right, so getting back to work here. Wow, so as I was talking, a number of questions have come in, and we'll keep the webinar open as we work through these. I'll just point out one question that people always have on mind is whether they'll be able to get a copy of the slides. We will make that available as well as a recording of this webinar, usually in a couple of days after the first broadcast. All right, so Joanne, are you ready for some questions?
Oh, yes, I am.
Okay. So first up, what was the biggest challenge you saw in implementing sustainable value-based pricing approach?
As I kind of mentioned during the presentation, the actual quantification is somewhat of the easy side. It's really getting that executed and sustained in a company. And so you just can't underestimate the amount of work and training that needs to go into your sales force, for sure, to keep them going, as well as the management to make sure they're enforcing the real need to go after value. And certainly I'm a believer that if you have a complex business line, and most B2B businesses do, without some sort of a system to be able to kind of capture, catalog, and make it easy for a salesperson to pull forward the right value and present it to the customer, it's hard to be sustainable.
Okay. So building on that question, what is the bigger challenge, the culture and the mindset change, or educating the stakeholders on how to use pricing metrics?
What was the biggest challenge? Training, which I wouldn't take lightly. As I said, I would take people through 2 days, just a management, marketing people and whatnot. Taking them through, it's easy to do if you have either the skill to do it internally or you're willing to pay to bring in somebody externally. And it goes a long way to really giving them the basis to understand a lot of things they need to do or what the rest of the organization needs to do so they can support it. Getting the culture, of course, is definitely harder. If you have to change sales incentives, if everything they're incented on is volume and share, or hitting quarterly end numbers without taking in the profitability, without anything that really drives them to go after value, those are harder things often to change. And depending where you are placed in your organization, you may have more difficulty to change it. If you happen to be a VP of marketing and you want to change it, you probably have a lot of influence. If you're a pricing resource and you're trying to push that ball uphill, it can be difficult.
Okay. We have a question. It's a thoughtful question about competition, and just to summarize it, the idea is that, if other competitors are pricing on value, you have higher profitability. And I guess the question is, can you give an example of how you signaled your intentions to price based on value? And I guess that's in terms of a competitive dynamics in the industry.
Well, I think in any kind of market messaging, whether you're messaging that you're raising price because you have good rationale for doing it or because you have a certain value, we would use avenues that went anywhere from certainly letters to the customer, often from the president and at times even from a CEO, talking about how we were changing pricing, why we were changing, what we were seeing in the environment, reminding them of the value add that we brought and the extra value and time and effort we put into innovation to better serve them in the future. So letters like that went out to customers, that went out to distributors. We would also at times be interviewed for articles. A lot of the analysts we would talk to, about value, about our pricing, and sometimes it was more strategically oriented, and sometimes it was very much value oriented, as we would bring out, let's say in our agricultural field, a whole new family of products that we thought were far superior. Getting those messages out broadly was always a positive. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think many of you may recognize it as you speak to any message out in the marketplace. It's one thing to say it verbally. It's usually more accepted and believed to be credible when it's seen in writing, and when it's seen in writing from a third party, it's even more viewed as credible. That's just some of the kind of psychology around how we think of things. So when you're interviewed by external parties, or there's, again, articles and whatnot that are written about maybe your new technology and the value, it brings that much more credibility. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question. This is a little bit more practical, and it's how do you quantify value without going to the customer, especially for mature products?
I talked about workshops and bringing in some salespeople, some technology or technical service folks, a business person, maybe even a customer service rep. If you do, often I find you have a lot of internal knowledge. Technical service people particularly, because they talk at different levels in an organization and have picked up things. And so between that group, either have the knowledge or you can at least hypothesize roughly what you think the value drivers are and roughly how you think they might be quantified. If you can't, if you don't have enough knowledge, then I still think you need to kind of go out to the customer, maybe not the buyer at the customer, who's likely to maybe not want to tell you some of that, but maybe your technical person talking to another technical guy has a little bit more access, or maybe your marketing people can come in and talk to the business, the people who actually use the product, in the guise of, we really want to understand how our products are working, how our service is working, so that we can better serve you in the future. And you're really talking in terms with those folks of where do they get value, what could you do better. And in the scheme of that kind of conversation, you can often get them to share what the actual value is. Or you can say, we believe, and we've seen a lot of our product really delivering 10 to 15% improvement with yield with our customers. Is that something that you've seen, and do you value that? So you can do it that sort of way if if you need be.
Yeah, no, that's very consistent with our experiences too, Joanne. I mean, basically what you're trying to do is you want to test a number of value hypotheses with customers, and first you've got to have that value hypotheses, and I think that workshop setting you described is a great way of doing that. The other thing that I've learned is that if you were to ask a customer straight up, how much value do we provide, they can't or they won't answer that. Whereas if you can test something and say, based on our understanding of your business, we think we provide this much value, well, you can immediately they'll immediately tell you that you're wrong, but they'll tell you how much you're wrong, and in a sense, they're telling you how much value you provide. I mean, is that something that you've seen yourself, Joanne, that type of process?
Absolutely. I'm right on board with that. I've also seen at times where we have said to the customer, we know it brings in this kind of value, and we're going to give you a trial price for 30 or 60 days with some guarantee that it's going to deliver that, and we'll come in and measure that so that you know for sure it's giving you just what we said.
Yeah.
Now, what we're doing is getting the actual data firsthand, right? And we've given some level of guarantee, back to maybe a non-premiated price in order to do that. But that kind of use of trials where you get some data or you get some case study back from them is another way to incent them to help you with the quantification. Yeah,
that's a really great suggestion. Here's an interesting question, and it's can you talk a little bit about your experiences with sales selling on value, and maybe to tack on to that, what's your opinion about using a technique like EVE, economic value estimation, in sales? Is that getting too technical for salespeople to use, and how should salespeople talk about value?
Okay, that's a great question. I don't think EVEs are too technical for salespeople. I think they absolutely have to understand the concepts behind that. Even if they're maybe not the one doing all of the math, they need to understand it because they should be out there in their conversations looking for value. And, the nature of a salesperson is to be able to sell value. That's primarily what they should be doing. I personally believe from a practical standpoint, you can't just say, okay, well, salespeople, go out and do your own thing and figure out what the EVE is and then go demonstrate it for your customers. I don't believe that's going to happen. But if you have something like a LeveragePoint where somebody is really set up, these are the likely drivers for, these product ranges, and here's the calculation on how you come up with value. So the salesperson just has to say, oh, geez, in electronics market, this customer, it's really just these three drivers that apply. And all I need to know is to put in maybe their total usage of product, and it's going to calculate for me the actual dollar savings and yield, so that they really have, somebody's really set up the basis, and they're just tweaking it for the specific customer's size or appropriate dynamics. That's very doable. But now the salesperson has to actually sell that. And if they have the EVE, and it's just on a spreadsheet for themselves, some of them are going to be good at being able to sell that value and talk to it. But all of them are going to be good at it if they also can hit a button and that spits out nice visuals with the varying valuations and the key inputs so that they can talk much more credibly to their customer. Or they can spit out, here's a case study of another similar customer and what they found in that. Those sort of things raise your odds tremendously. The easier you can make it on the salesperson, the much more likely it's going to be sustainably done.
So a related question to sales with regard to incentives or metrics. It says, do you have experience with realized price-based incentives for sales besides volume and margin?
At different times we use different sales metrics in DuPont, and it really depended on what we were trying to push at that particular time, given that year's macroeconomic situation and whatnot. So sometimes we literally were pushing and had like an actual price component. At other times we had more of a margin component because that made more sense in them making the right price and value move. We did not personally advance to what I have seen other companies begin to do, which is to bring in some real value drivers, as in part of their incentive might have been how many times they either brought in a case study or how many times they actually, a percentage of their sales, they actually used a value calculator or quantifier. So something that really demonstrated in the use of their systems or what they documented that they were using true value pricing. So in DuPont, we never took it to that level by the time that I was moved on to a different role, but that was certainly on the trend line that we were at in certain businesses.
Okay, we still have some more questions here. There's one about can Joanne comment on the process for developing value propositions? Who should be involved and how long does it take?
Value propositions, like value pricing, they're all linked together. So, because at the end of the day, a good value prop not only speaks to the value, but it speaks to how you are compensated for that value. So I think traditionally I would say your marketing lead has maybe the person that should be doing that or driving it, but you need to have sales in that room because they have a set of knowledge base that you often don't have. It's great to have your technical service or your technology group in because often they have knowledge about some of the value that might not be as obvious. And quite often, while pricing resources are not traditionally the ones that should do it, quite often they might be the instigator to bring that group together if it's not naturally happening because they need to get at the price point and they can see that the value prop is too weak or not articulated well enough, or if tweaked, they could get higher price, and so they can tension it back. And those bodies together can usually come up with the sweet spots.
Yeah, and we have a lot of experience ourselves helping companies pull together their value propositions, and if you get people, on a common platform and a structured approach, you can develop these rather quickly, and as fast as the team wants to develop them. So we're talking a process that takes, weeks to put together a decent value proposition, but something that's very consistent and grounded in value. So the technology makes this a lot easier to do once it's established. There was one question that I'd like you to address, Joanne, and it was sort of like, well, DuPont's chemical company. Is what you're saying, only apply to that industry, or do you see this more broadly applicable to other types of companies?
Well, certainly DuPont is highly, highly diverse. As I talk about agricultural businesses, nutrition and food businesses, basic chemicals, into electronics and automotive, and you name it, we have B2C businesses in the company. I have found the fundamentals of pricing, it didn't really matter which business I went into. The basic fundamentals held. They played out a little bit differently. One business might have much heavier value pricing and a little bit less strategic and a little less transactional maybe than another, but the foundations applied across. So absolutely, I think it applies. When you get into a B2C business, not only does it apply, but there's also additional techniques that one can use with design of experiment and varying more advanced sort of things when you have thousands and thousands or hundreds of thousands of customers. That would be slightly different than straight B2B work.
Okay. Yeah. No. Excellent point. It's broadly applied to most businesses. Absolutely. And here's a question about emerging markets, particularly in China, India, Brazil. There's a real focus on getting the lowest possible cost. Does value pricing work in emerging markets, do you think?
Well, yes, I think value pricing works because value pricing is understanding that the customer needs and aligning the offering price point to that. So in some emerging markets, you have a higher percent of price buyers at times. And so sometimes you need to have maybe your lowest end standard products that you're going to offer in that case at some lower prices. But also, not always as a parent, but sometimes in emerging markets, they actually need more service. They may not be as experienced on how to use the product. They might need more troubleshooting and other kinds of services that kind of help them advance. And those are services that you can charge for. So even if they're using that basic product, I wouldn't presume, even though the price pressure is high, that they are all price buyers.
Yeah, and another point I'd like to add to that, and this has come up before, is that sometimes people think of value pricing as some sort of way to raise your prices, right? That it's some sort of magic bullet that allows you to take your existing product and give it a higher price. And it doesn't mean that. Value pricing means pricing on value. And sometimes that means putting a lower price in. So it's not really the high price, it's the right price. That's what the value approach kind of gets at, what you're really delivering to customers.
Absolutely. There are times when I would absolutely recommend a lower price, usually a little bit stripped down offering in some fashion, to get it higher volume and to really meet the needs of a given market segment.
Right, absolutely. Great. So I think that kind of wraps up the questions that we have, and I just want to make a quick program note about our next webinar coming up in February. But again, we will have a posting of the recording and the slides available from this presentation shortly for all participants. If you have any other further questions or comments, you can please get in touch with us at webinars@leveragepoint.com. And for our next webinar on February 26th, we will have a thought leader, Dr. Stefan Liauzou, who also has a new book out, The ROI of Pricing, and also has done some research on the financial impacts of value-based pricing on B2B enterprises. So he has some new information about how industry is doing on value-based pricing. February 26th, look for an email invitation soon. And also there will be a post-webinar survey after you leave today. If you can take a moment to fill it out, we would very much appreciate it. So Joanne, thanks again for your time today, and I really appreciate you staying later to answer the questions.
Oh, you're quite welcome. My pleasure.
All right, and thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next month.